Let's imagine that this story took place 6 years ago in quiet Louisiana, and what was hidden behind the facade of an American family. The town of St. Martinville in St. Martin Parish, Louisiana, is known for its swampy landscapes, Creole culture, and measured Southern lifestyle. 54-year-old Dolores Clark, a woman who had lived a difficult life, lived in a small one-story house on East Bridge Street. Widowed 12 years ago, she raised her son Dennis alone, working as a cashier at a local grocery store and moonlighting as a cleaner at St. John's Church. Short, plump, with graying brown hair and kind brown eyes, Dolores was one of those women who devote their entire lives to their families, forgetting about themselves. Neighbors described her as a quiet, God-fearing woman who never missed Sunday Mass and was always ready to help those in need. Her life was predictable and monotonous. Work, home, church, work again. The years passed one after another, bringing neither particular joy nor particular sorrow. Her son Dennis, a 38-year-old man who was overweight and balding, never started a family of his own. He worked as a mechanic in a garage on the outskirts of town, lived with his mother, and considered himself the head of the family after his father's death. Neighbors described him as a withdrawn man with a difficult personality who could fly off the handle over trifles and was not shy about expressing himself. Dennis drove an old 1998 Ford F-150 pickup truck, spent his free time at the local bar, and had no close friends. He was one of those people you see every day but don't notice. A gray mass, an ordinary resident of a small town, blending in with the crowd. In the spring of 2020, when the coronavirus pandemic forced the world into isolation, an unexpected event occurred in Dolores's life. Her neighbor, 45-year-old Marcus Dubois, a recently divorced carpenter, began to show her signs of attention. First, he helped repair her porch, then brought her vegetables from his garden, and then they began drinking coffee together on the porch in the mornings. A lonely woman who had not known male warmth for years suddenly felt desirable and alive again. What began as innocent neighborly communication grew into a romance. For Dolores, it was a return to life after many years of a dull existence. She started wearing makeup again, bought a new dress, and even lost a few pounds. Her neighbors noticed her transformation and whispered behind her back. In a small town, nothing goes unnoticed. Dennis treated what was happening with undisguised contempt. He believed that his mother was dishonoring his father's memory and making their family a laughingstock in the eyes of the whole town. Fierce arguments broke out between mother and son. Dennis demanded that she end her relationship with Marcus, called his mother names, and threatened to kick her out of the house, even though it belonged to her. Neighbors heard screams coming from the Clarks' house and saw Dennis slam the door and drive away in his pickup truck with a screech of tires. But no one intervened. In small southern towns, family matters are considered strictly private. In early July 2020, Dolores felt unwell. Morning sickness, dizziness, strange fatigue. She attributed it all to stress and the summer heat. But when the symptoms persisted for weeks, she decided to see a doctor. What she heard in Dr. Elizabeth Landry's office at the St. Martin County Clinic shocked her. Dolores was pregnant. At 54, when she thought her reproductive years were long behind her, her body had given her an incredible surprise. Dr. Landry couldn't believe her eyes as she double-checked the test results. Although such cases do occur in medical practice, they remain extremely rare and are always associated with high risks. The doctor warned of serious danger, both for the mother and the child. Dolores was confused. On the one hand, she was afraid of the condemnation of those around her and her son's reaction. On the other hand, as a deeply religious woman, she could not even consider abortion. She told Marcus, and he reacted ambiguously. He acknowledged his responsibility, but made it clear that becoming a father at 45 was not part of his plans, especially under such circumstances. On July 23rd, Dolores gathered her courage and told Dennis the news. His reaction exceeded her worst fears. Her son flew into a rage, smashed several plates, and yelled so loudly that the neighbors 2 houses away could hear him. He shouted that she was bringing shame on the family, destroying his father's memory, and that the whole town would laugh at them. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Dennis barely spoke to his mother, slammed doors demonstratively, came home drunk, and continued his insults. Sunday, August 9th, 2020, was hot and humid, as is often the case in Louisiana in the middle of summer. Heavy gray clouds covered the sky, promising a thunderstorm in the evening. The air was so thick that it was difficult to breathe, and mosquitoes swarmed over the swamps in endless clouds. Dolores woke up early, as usual, and felt nauseous. Her early morning sickness wouldn't let up. She drank some water and stood at the window, looking out at the empty street. The house was quiet. Dennis was still asleep after yesterday's drinking session with his friends. Around 10 in the morning, Dennis came out of his room. To Dolores' surprise, he was sober and even smiling for the first time in weeks. He said he wanted to apologize for his behavior, that he had thought everything over and was ready to accept the situation. He suggested that his mother visit the farm of old Joe Thibodeau, a family friend who ran a small farm 10 miles from the city. Dennis explained that he wanted to show his mother the newborn calves. He knew Dolores loved animals. The woman was surprised and delighted by this change in her son's mood. She hoped that the worst was behind them, that Dennis had truly come to terms with the news. She did not know that her son had already made a decision from which there was no turning back. They left around 11 in the morning in Dennis's old pickup truck. The road led through marshy lowlands, past abandoned sugar plantations and scattered houses. Dolores sat silently, looking out the window at the passing scenery. Dennis drove calmly, even humming something under his breath. Joe Thibodeau's farm consisted of several dilapidated buildings on the edge of a dense forest. Old Joe had died 3 years ago, and his heirs had not sold the land, which was slowly becoming overgrown with weeds and bushes. Dennis knew this. He knew there would be no one here. He had planned everything carefully. When they arrived at the farm, Dolores immediately sensed that something was wrong. The place looked abandoned. A broken fence, a crooked barn, tall grass. She asked her son where the calves were, and Dennis replied that they were in the far pen, and they would have to walk a little way. They got out of the car. The heat was stifling. The air was still. Crows cawed somewhere in the distance. Dennis led his mother behind the barn to an old cesspool that had once been used to dispose of waste from the farm. It was a concrete septic tank about 3 meters deep, filled with human excrement and waste. The smell was appalling, but in the Louisiana heat it mingled with the general smell of swamps and rotting vegetation. What happened next is shocking in its cruelty. You know, I've been studying cases like this for many years, but every time I freeze at this moment. This is not just a flash of anger, not a momentary impulse. The man brought a shovel with him, chose the location in advance, and thought through every detail. He looked his mother in the eyes that morning, smiled at her, promised reconciliation, and all the while knew that in an hour she would be dead. He did not see her as a person, not as the woman who gave birth to him and devoted her life to him, but merely as a stain on the family's reputation that needed to be erased. It's scary to even imagine what was going through his head at that moment. Dennis grabbed the shovel he had left near the septic tank and suddenly hit his mother on the back of the head. Dolores fell to the ground, stunned but still conscious. Blood ran through her hair, mixing with the dirt. She tried to say something, but only wheezes came out of her throat. Dennis grabbed his mother by the legs and dragged her to the edge of the septic tank. The woman tried to resist, clinging to the grass, but the strength was unequal. He pushed her into the pit. Dolores fell into a thick mass of feces, sinking beneath the surface. She surfaced, gasping for air, trying to grab hold of the slippery concrete walls covered in slime and filth. Her hands slipped again and again. Dennis stood above, took out his phone, and started filming. He coldly recorded his own mother's agony. Dolores was drowning slowly, painfully. She tried to scream, but her mouth was filled with disgusting slime. She choked, spat, and tried to breathe again. The walls of the septic tank were too high and slippery to climb out. She struggled, clinging to life, begging her son for help, but he continued filming. The light slowly faded from her eyes. 12 minutes later, 12 endless, agonizing minutes, Dolores Clark stopped moving. Her body slowly sank into the waste. Dennis turned off his phone, calmly returned to his pickup truck, and drove away. Marcus Dubois was the first to worry about Dolores. On the evening of August 9th, he called her several times, but there was no answer. The next day, he went to the Clarks' house, but no one answered the door. Dennis's pickup truck was in the driveway, but Dennis himself was nowhere to be seen. Marcus waited another day, then filed a missing person report with the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office. Detective Raymond Broussard, a veteran with 25 years of police experience, took the case. A thin man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, Broussard was known for his thoroughness and tenacity. He began by interviewing Dennis Clark. The missing woman's son was acting strangely. He was nervous, avoided eye contact, and contradicted himself in his statements. At first, he said that his mother had gone to visit a distant relative in Texas, then changed his story, saying that she had left on her own without saying where she was going. The detective sensed that something was wrong, but without evidence, he could not press charges. Dolores's car, an old 2005 Honda Accord, was parked near the house. Her bag, documents, and money were all there. Her phone last registered a signal on the morning of August 9th, somewhere in the area of Old Farms west of the city, and then it was turned off or ran out of battery. It didn't look like a voluntary departure. The police organized a search with the help of volunteers from the local community. They combed through forests, swamps, and abandoned buildings. But St. Martinville is surrounded by thousands of acres of impenetrable swamps where anything can be hidden. Rumors began to spread in the city. Some said that Dolores had run away with her lover to escape disgrace. Others whispered that Marcus Dubois had killed her because he didn't want to take responsibility for the child. Still others suspected Dennis himself, but most could not believe that a son would be capable of killing his own mother. The police investigated all possibilities. Marcus Dubois was questioned 3 times, provided DNA samples, and cooperated fully with the investigation. His alibi for August 9th was ironclad. He had been working all day at a construction site in a neighboring town, which was confirmed by dozens of witnesses. Dennis Clark was acting increasingly suspicious. He hired a lawyer, refused further questioning, and stopped leaving his house. Neighbors saw him sitting in the dark for days, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle, sometimes shouting something incomprehensible. Detective Broussard was sure that Dennis knew more than he was saying, but he couldn't prove it. He checked all the abandoned farms within a 20-mile radius, examined every well and every pit, but the search yielded no results. Dolores's body seemed to have vanished into thin air. However, the case took a dramatic turn on the 7th day after the murder. On August 16th, Dennis Clark came to Bayou Bob's bar on the outskirts of town. He was very drunk, staggering and slurring his words. Several of his old acquaintances were sitting at the bar, mechanics, builders, ordinary workers with whom Dennis sometimes drank. He ordered whiskey, drank it in one gulp, and ordered another. Then he took out his phone and said he wanted to show them something interesting. The alcohol and the feeling of impunity loosened his tongue. In his inflamed, alcohol-soaked brain, this video was not evidence of a crime, but a trophy. Proof that he had cleansed his family of shame, that he had proven himself stronger, that he had restored his father's honor. A week spent waiting for the police to knock on the door, a week of interrogations and suspicions, instead of sobering him up, convinced him of his own invulnerability. If he hadn't been caught in a week, it meant he had done everything right. It meant he was a genius, and that had to be shared. What the bar patrons saw horrified them. On the screen was a video recording. A woman was floundering in a cesspool, choking on feces, desperately trying to get out. Her screams, gasps, and sounds that are impossible to forget could be heard. Dennis laughed as he showed the video, saying that the old whore got what she deserved. One of those present, a builder named Carl Robichaux, left the bar and immediately called the police. When the patrol officers arrived at Bayou Bob's bar, Dennis was already trying to leave, but he was detained right in the parking lot. The phone was seized as evidence. The video was so shocking that even experienced police officers, who had seen a lot over the years, couldn't watch it to the end. Forensic analysis confirmed that the video was indeed of Dolores Clark, and the file's metadata showed that it was recorded on August 9th at 11:32 a.m. Detective Broussard immediately organized a search of all abandoned farms in the area where Dolores's phone signal was last detected. Now the police knew what to look for: a cesspool or septic tank. On August 17th, a team of investigators arrived at Joe Thibodeau's old farm. The smell from the septic tank behind the barn was unbearable. Specialists in protective suits began pumping out the contents of the pit. It was a horrible, nauseating job. After several hours, at a depth of about 2.5 meters, they discovered human remains. Dolores Clark's body had been in the septic tank for 8 days. The Louisiana heat and the aggressive environment of the feces accelerated the decomposition process. The remains were in terrible condition, but forensic expert Dr. Michael Lando was able to perform an autopsy. He determined that the cause of death was drowning in fecal matter, preceded by blunt force trauma to the skull. A fracture of the parietal bone was found on the back of the victim's head, consistent with a blow from a heavy object, probably a shovel. Particles of feces were found in the lungs, confirming that the woman was still alive when she was thrown into the pit. She was breathing. She was fighting for her life during those 12 minutes captured on video. Dennis Clark was officially arrested and charged with first-degree murder with extreme cruelty. St. Martin County prosecutor Thomas LeBlanc said it was one of the most heinous crimes he had seen in his career. Dennis's lawyer attempted to build the defense based on temporary insanity, claiming that his client acted in a state of passion due to the shame and disgrace his mother had brought upon him. But the video footage spoke for itself. The cold-bloodedness with which Dennis filmed his mother's agony ruled out the passion theory. The trial began in March 2021 in the District Court of St. Martin. The courtroom was packed. The townspeople wanted to see with their own eyes the man capable of such a heinous crime. The prosecutor presented the video recording, witness testimony from the bar, and expert opinions. The defense tried to prove that Dennis suffered from a mental disorder and was not aware of the consequences of his actions. However, a psychiatric evaluation found the defendant to be sane at the time of the crime. Marcus Dubois testified, describing Dolores as a kind, loving woman who simply wanted to be happy in the last years of her life. He could not hold back his tears as he spoke about how they had planned their future together, how she had dreamed of having a child despite all the risks. Dolores's neighbors spoke of her kindness, how she helped everyone in need, how she wished no harm to anyone. Carl Robichaud described the horrific scene in the bar when Dennis bragged about the murder, laughing at his own mother's suffering. The most shocking moment of the trial was when the defendant was given the floor. Dennis Clark waived his right to remain silent and gave a speech that shocked everyone present. He said that he did not regret what he had done, that his mother had disgraced the family, betrayed his father's memory, and become a laughingstock for the whole town. He declared that she was to blame for what had happened to her, that at her age, getting pregnant by a neighbor was disgusting and unacceptable. His last words to the court sounded like a sentence to himself. The old whore deserved no better. Listen, I'm going to say something that may seem harsh, but it needs to be said. Dennis talks about family honor and traditions, hiding behind morality and protecting his father's memory. But what kind of morals can a man have who films his own mother's death on his phone for 12 minutes? What honor is there in throwing a woman into a pit of excrement and watching her agony? This is not defending honor. This is not righteous anger. This is absolute, distilled evil that has simply found a convenient excuse in the form of traditions and shame. Behind the words about shame lies a desire to control, suppress, and possess someone else's life. And when control slipped away, the mechanism of destruction was activated. Shouts of indignation rang out in the courtroom, and the judge had to call for order. The jury retired to deliberate and returned 3 hours later. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of first-degree murder with extreme cruelty. Judge Catherine Dupre handed down the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Dennis Clark showed no emotion upon hearing the sentence. He stared into space, as if none of this concerned him. He was led away in handcuffs amid cries of protest from the courtroom. People were demanding the death penalty, even though it is rarely imposed in Louisiana. The Dolores Clark case became one of the most high-profile in the history of St. Martin Parish. Local and national media covered the trial, calling the murder one of the most brutal family crimes in the state's history. Psychologists and criminologists analyzed Dennis's motives, trying to understand what could have led to such monstrous hatred for his own mother. Some experts spoke of toxic masculinity, patriarchal notions of honor and shame, and deeply rooted prejudices about female sexuality. Marcus Dubois never recovered from the loss of Dolores. He sold his house and left Saint Martinville, unable to live in the place where such a tragedy had occurred. Dolores's neighbors put up a memorial plaque near her house that read, "In memory of Dolores Clark, a loving mother, a kind neighbor, a woman who deserved happiness." St. John's Church held a memorial service, which was attended by the entire town. People brought flowers, candles, and photographs of Dolores. Everyone remembered her smile, her kindness, and her willingness to help. Detective Raymond Broussard later said in an interview that this case changed his view of the nature of evil. He had seen many crimes over the years, robberies, murders, violence, but the fact that a son could cold-bloodedly kill his own mother, film it on video, and brag about his deed was beyond his comprehension. He noted that without the video being shown in the bar, without Carl Robichaud's phone call, this murder might have remained unsolved forever. Dolores's body would have decomposed in the septic tank, and after a few months, no one would have been able to identify the remains. Today, Dennis Clark is serving a life sentence in a Louisiana state prison. He has not appealed and has shown no remorse. In the rare interviews he has given from prison, he has continued to insist that he did the right thing, that he was protecting his family's honor. Psychologists who have worked with him note a complete lack of empathy and an inability to comprehend the monstrosity of his actions. This is a classic case of sociopathy, exacerbated by cultural prejudices and toxic notions of male honor. I often see questions in the comments asking why I tell such horrific stories, probably so that we remember. Monsters do not always hide in forests or fairy tales. Sometimes they sit with us at the dinner table, and the most important thing is not to miss the moment when quiet resentment turns into deadly hatred, when control over someone else's life becomes more important than life itself. When notions of honor and tradition supplant the last vestiges of humanity. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the videos so you don't miss new stories about the most shocking crimes and mysterious investigations. Share your opinion in the comments. Do you think society should intervene more actively in cases of domestic violence, even if the victim does not ask for help? Your opinion is important to us. See you in the next episode.